NBA teammates are often referred to as brothers. They're supposed to have your back. They're supposed to be guys that you're friends with and you can count on. They're supposed to be players that put in the work together to achieve one common goal of winning a championship as a team. But these 10 guys did anything but that and are quite possibly the 10 worst NBA teammates of all time. Take Derek Fisher for example. He was always a stand-up guy and a leader of the Los Angeles Lakers. He was loved by most players that spent any amount of time with him. But according to one former teammate, he's the worst teammate of all time. You see, Matt Barnes and Derek Fisher were together for 2 years in 2010 and 11 on the Los Angeles Lakers. And apparently everything went great. They had a lot of success as a team, they got along and all was well. But then in 2015, he started hooking up with his ex-wife. Apparently Barnes got a call from his son saying that Derek was at their house. So he drove 15 minutes to their home and beat Fisher up in the backyard. Matt said they had to be pulled apart 3 times, but on the 3rd time he finally got him. And it was definitely deserved because Derek was sleeping with his former teammate's wife when their divorce wasn't even finalized yet. But Barnes said the biggest insult for him was that Fisher was in his old house that he pays for with his kids and he didn't tell him. Now apparently the beatdown didn't fully work because Derek and Gloria are still together to this day, but luckily they're all on the same page. Matt says they communicate and see each other at events and they've been to each other's houses to make things work for their twin sons. Obviously that's a good thing, but still a terrible move by D-Fish. And speaking of Lakers players, no matter how good you are or how incredible of a career you've had, it doesn't automatically mean you're a great teammate by any means. Just ask Kobe Bryant, who's a top player in NBA history, but easily one of the worst teammates of all time. Kobe was famously one of maybe the hardest worker we've ever seen, but he often took that work ethic too far and took things out on his teammates too. He was infamously labeled as a ball hog throughout most of his career, but when asked about it, he says, "I see guys show up 10 minutes before practice and leave right after, so why would I pass them the ball?" And that was his thing. If he didn't see you working hard, he didn't respect you. It was the ultimate form of tough love. It was even one of the biggest reasons himself and Shaq had problems. Throughout his career, Shaq's been known to be a little bit on the lazy side, and Kobe didn't respect that, which was the root of a lot of their issues. But Shaq could take the verbal abuse, and he had the talent to back things up, and it's why the two won multiple championships together. But not everyone was like that. Kobe Bryant pushed around a lot of his teammates to test them. He apparently hated Smush Parker and refused to talk to him, with Smush saying, "One day in practice I tried to talk to Kobe outside of basketball about football. He looked at me dead serious and said, 'You can't talk to me. You need more accolades under your belt before you come talk to me.'" He even made another player, Stanislav Medvedenko, cry. He was a nobody European player, but Kobe said he sat down next to him after practice one day and said, "You know dude, you might want to reconsider what your life purpose is. Maybe it's not basketball." And the guy just broke out in tears. So while Bryant was a great player, if you weren't good with tough love, you probably hated being on the same team as him. Like Dwight Howard for example, he was the same as Shaq in the fact that he liked to joke around and didn't have an excellent work ethic, which is why he also didn't mesh well with Kobe. The only difference was that he didn't have that winning mentality to be able to make things work with him, and that personality that Dwight had made him one of the most hated teammates in the history of the game, because it's really rare when a player bounces around teams and almost every single player on each of them hates him. On the Magic, he got Stan Van Gundy fired and lied about it, leading to this extremely awkward interview. On the Lakers, Kobe hated him, and Steve Nash wasn't a fan either. James Harden made it clear he was never a fan of Dwight. The entire Atlanta Hawks roster reportedly screamed and cheered when learning he was traded away. The Hornets roster were sick and tired of Howard's act, and all of this was proven by the fact that in 2018 he came out and said that he has no friends in the NBA and doesn't hang out with any NBA players. And ever since then, the hate for him has kind of mellowed out across the league, but still, that took him a good 10 years to figure out how to be an okay teammate. But while speaking of former Lakers players, we do have to mention Ron Artest, aka Meta World Peace. Now to the public eye, Artest has always had a little bit of crazy in him, and if you were on the opposing team, you always had to worry a little bit that you weren't gonna get your head taken off. His teammates though, they were safe because he had their back and would do anything for them, or at least so it seemed, because in 2009 he came out and said that in his first 3 seasons in the league for the Chicago Bulls, he used to drink Hennessy sometimes before games and during halftime, and if he was willing to do that, he obviously didn't care too much about his teammates or his team's success. I assume that it stopped after those 3 years, but hey, with Ron Artest, you really never know. And he's not the only one whose off-court issues affected not only himself, but his teammates too, because fellow Laker D'Angelo Russell pulled off the ultimate betrayal. When him and teammate Nick Young were hanging out at his house, he started asking him questions about women he slept with and who he cheated on his fiancée Iggy Azalea with. But the fact that he was only asking those questions so he could record his answers and then send the video to his friends is what crossed the line. And it made it even worse once the video surfaced. surfaced to the public, and Azalea broke off their engagement. Nobody's defending Nick Young for cheating, he shouldn't have done that, but that makes him a bad boyfriend, and what D'Angelo did made him a terrible teammate. And it got so bad that the entire Lakers locker room lost trust in him, refused to even be around him, wouldn't sit with him at team breakfast, and he had to straight up get traded in a bad deal to the Brooklyn Nets. On the other hand, Stephon Marbury was a guy that never fit in super well with his teams. He was a great player that averaged nearly 20 and 10 for most of his years in the league, but he was one of those guys whose attitudes and egos always got in the way. After multiple problems with head coaches throughout his career, he ended up on the New York Knicks, where Isaiah Thomas was running things, and he wasn't one to back down, so the two of them were constantly getting into it, mainly about Marbury's attitude. So when they were on the team playing and Isaiah told Stephon that he was thinking about taking him out of the starting lineup, punches were thrown and the two had to be separated by the rest of the team. And after all of this, the Knicks organization banned Stephon Marbury from entering the arena or attending any of their games. So you gotta know you're a terrible teammate and team player when you're still an active player and your own team bans you from ever coming back. Now switching gears, Michael Jordan is the greatest of all time, so we'd love to imagine he was the perfect guy too, but he was far from it, and actually makes a case for being the worst teammate to have ever lived. There's so many stories out there, so I'll just list off some of his highlights, like punching Steve Kerr and Will Perdue in the face at practice, may or may not have made Kwame Brown cry, intentionally made Bill Cartwright look bad in practice as punishment for getting traded for his friend, yelling at and embarrassing teammates almost every single day, as well as having almost all of his former teammates, including Scottie Pippen, come out and say that he was way too hard on guys and he wasn't a great teammate. Then to take things even a step further, he made the Last Dance documentary and tried to spin all the terrible ways he treated his teammates to making it look like he was just inspiring them or helping them, when really I'm sure they would have won just as much had he been a little softer on them. There's a way to inspire and motivate your team to play better, but MJ went about things all the wrong way. And on top of all the other stories out there about how Michael Jordan is as a person, I think it's safe to say that all of his teammates were telling the truth. And I guess Kevin Garnett missed the memo too, that you're only supposed to be mean and trash talk the other team, not your own guys. Because KG is infamously one of the meanest and dirtiest trash talking players in the history of the game. He'd often get in other players' faces, yell at them, and nothing was off limits. He'd say whatever he could to get into the other team's head. But when you're doing that in practice to your own squad, you really just start to seem like a bad guy. And nobody was off limits for him either. On a few occasions, he'd kick Rondo out of practice for not playing defense and yell at him to get the out. Avery Bradley said when Kevin came through those doors on game day, he was angry. We couldn't talk, laugh, listen to music. We'd all hide in the training rooms or the bathroom. Former 9th overall pick Patrick O'Brien says KG used to yell and scream at him to try to get him to scream back. And when he wouldn't, he just got louder and would yell at him all the way down the court after a dunk. And these are just a few examples. He's also had big altercations with Mason Plumlee, Wally Zerbiak, Rasho Nesterovic, Darren Williams, and of course made Glenn Davis cry on the bench in the middle of a game, which is still pretty funny. And for as funny as Allen Iverson's practice speech still is to this day, when you really break down what's being said, it's clear that he wasn't a great teammate. He would often skip practice because he stayed out too late partying, then get upset when there were consequences for it. He would choose not to show up, and because of his ego and the fact that he was a star, he would assume that it should all be okay because he could still go out there and score 30. Now of course his teammates couldn't even be mad because with all that he would still win MVPs and lead them to the finals. But you also can't call Iverson a good teammate by any means if he thinks he's too good to have to practice with the team. But speaking of practice, Latrell Sprewell made his name off of team practices for all the wrong reasons. And it's why he mainly makes this list, because it's where he got into a fist fight with a teammate, threatened to bring weapons to practice, beat up his head coach, and constantly got into off-court trouble, putting his team in jeopardy. He may not be the overall worst teammate, but he does make a pretty good case for it.